My name is Margaret Holloway. I'm 72 years old, and I learned something important standing in the doorway of my own lake house that Saturday afternoon. Sometimes the people who should love you most are the ones who see you as nothing more than an obstacle to overcome. The gravel crunched under my tires as I pulled into the long driveway, and I remember feeling that flutter of anticipation I always got when visiting the lake house. 40 years I'd owned this place. 40 years of memories soaked into every wooden beam, every stone of the fireplace, every window that looked out over the water. My late husband Thomas and I had bought it when we were young and foolish and thought we had all the time in the world. We'd raised our son Derek here during summers, taught him to swim off the dock, helped him catch his first fish. I'd driven 3 hours to get here, looking forward to a quiet weekend. My arthritis had been bothering me, and my doctor suggested rest, peace, time away from the city noise. The lake house seemed perfect. I hadn't called ahead. Why would I? It was my property, my sanctuary, my name on the deed. But as I climbed out of my car, I noticed Derek's SUV parked near the porch, along with another vehicle I didn't recognize. Music drifted from inside, laughter, the sound of children running. My chest tightened slightly, not with anger, but with confusion. Derek hadn't mentioned he'd be using the house this weekend. I walked up the porch steps, my keys already in hand, but before I could even reach the door, it swung open. Derek stood there, my 45-year-old son, wearing an expression I'd never seen before. Something between annoyance and genuine anger. "Mom?" His voice wasn't warm. "What are you doing here?" I blinked, taken aback. I came to spend the weekend. I didn't realize you'd be here." "We're here with the family," he said, not moving from the doorway. "It's not really a good time." Behind him, I could see my daughter-in-law Vanessa sitting on the leather sofa Thomas and I had picked out together 20 years ago. She didn't stand, didn't wave, just watched with an expression I couldn't quite read. Their 2 children, Emma and Jake, were playing with tablets, oblivious. "I don't understand," I said slowly. "This is my house, Derek. I thought I could—" "Your house." He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Right. The house you never use anymore. The house just sitting here while we're crammed in our place in the city." Something cold settled in my stomach. "I use it several times a year. I was just here last month." "Once a month isn't using it, Mom. It's wasting it." Vanessa stood then, walking over to stand beside Derek. She was a tall woman, always impeccably dressed, always concerned with appearances. "Margaret, perhaps we should talk about this another time. We have guests coming over later." "And guests?" I felt something inside me beginning to crack. "You're hosting guests at my house without even telling me?" Derek's jaw tightened. "That's exactly the attitude we're talking about. Everything is always yours. Your house, your property, your rules. Did you ever think maybe it's time to share some of that with your family?" I stood there, my overnight bag still in my hand, trying to process what was happening. This was my son, the boy I'd carried for 9 months, raised, put through college, helped with his first house down payment, the man I'd loved unconditionally for 45 years. "I do share," I said quietly. "You're welcome here any time. You know that. You have a key." "A key," Vanessa said, her voice sharp, like we're house guests in a place that should be part of our family's assets. Assets. The word hung in the air like poison. "Maybe you should come back another weekend," Derek said, his hand still on the door like he was ready to close it in my face. "We've got plans, and honestly, Mom, having you here would just be awkward." I looked at my son, really looked at him, and I didn't recognize the person staring back. When had this happened? When had I become an inconvenience in his life rather than his mother? "Derek," I started, my voice barely above a whisper. "I drove 3 hours. I just wanted—" "Why did that old leech show up?" Vanessa's voice cut through my words, and I realized she'd turned to speak to someone behind her in the house. The words were loud enough for me to hear, clearly intentional. "No space for you. She turned back to me, her face a mask of false sweetness. "Sorry, Margaret, but we really do need you to leave." I felt something inside me go very still. Old leech. Those words echoed in my head, bouncing around like bullets. Derek stepped forward then, and before I could react, his hand was around my wrist. His grip was tight, painful, his fingers pressing into the thin skin where my bones felt too close to the surface. He pulled me slightly away from the door, away from any neighbor's potential view, his face inches from mine. "Listen to me," he hissed, his voice low and controlled. "This house is wasted on you. You're 72 years old, living alone in that big house in the city. You don't need this place anymore. Sign the deed over to me or get out and don't come back." The pain in my wrist was sharp, but the pain in my chest was sharper. I looked into my son's eyes and saw a stranger. A stranger who saw me not as his mother, but as an obstacle between him and what he wanted. "You're hurting me," I whispered. "I'm serious, Mom." His grip tightened. "Sign it over. Today. Now. Or leave, and we'll have this conversation through lawyers." Time seemed to slow down. I could hear the lake water lapping against the shore in the distance, could smell the pine trees that surrounded the property, could feel the late afternoon sun warm on my shoulders. All the beautiful things about this place, this sanctuary Thomas and I had built together, and in the middle of it stood my son, threatening me. I did something then that I'd perfected over 72 years of living. I smiled. Not a big smile, not a happy one, just a small, calm smile that didn't reach my eyes. "It's okay, dear," I said softly. Derek's expression shifted slightly, confusion mixing with his anger. He'd expected tears, expected pleading, expected his elderly mother to crumble under the pressure. That's what he wanted. An easy capitulation, a quick signature, a transfer of assets from the useless old woman to the deserving middle-aged son. I pulled my wrist gently from his grip, and he let me go, probably thinking he'd won. "I understand," I continued, my voice steady. "I understand completely." Vanessa appeared beside him again, her eyes bright with triumph. "So you'll sign the papers? We can have them drawn up by Monday." "We'll talk," I said vaguely, stepping back toward my car. "Let me think about it." "There's nothing to think about," Derek called after me. "You sign it over, or you can forget about being part of this family." I turned back, and for just a moment, I let them see something in my eyes, something that made Derek's confident expression falter slightly. I said, "I understand, Derek. I understand everything now." I got into my car, started the engine, and drove away from the lake house, away from my son and his wife and their entitled demands. In my rearview mirror, I could see them standing on the porch, Vanessa's arm around Derek's waist, already turning back inside to enjoy their weekend at my house. But they didn't know what I knew. They didn't understand what they'd just unleashed. Because I wasn't just Margaret Holloway, retired schoolteacher and widow. I was Margaret Holloway, daughter of a real estate attorney who had learned at her father's knee exactly how property law worked. I was Margaret Holloway, who had spent 40 years teaching high school students not just history, but critical thinking and strategy. I was Margaret Holloway, who had survived cancer, the death of her husband, and the Depression-era mentality of making every dollar count. And I was Margaret Holloway, who had just been threatened and insulted by her only child in a way that crossed a line so profound there would be no going back. As I drove, my hands steady on the wheel despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins, I began to plan. Not revenge. I didn't believe in revenge. But justice, consequences, education. My son needed to learn a lesson, and I was still a teacher at heart. The drive back to the city gave me 3 hours to think, to process, to move past the initial shock and hurt and into something colder, more calculated. I'd raised Derek to be independent, strong, self-sufficient. Somehow, I'd failed to teach him gratitude, respect, and basic human decency. That was my fault, perhaps. Thomas had always been the disciplinarian, while I'd been the nurturer. After he died 8 years ago, I'd spoiled Derek in my grief, trying to make up for his father's absence. Money when he needed it. Help with the grandkids, support for Vanessa's expensive tastes. I'd enabled them without realizing I was creating monsters. Old leech. The words kept echoing. I'd never taken anything from Derek except love and pride in being his mother. I'd given him everything: life, education, support, inheritance from his father. And now I was a leech. By the time I pulled into my driveway in the city, the hurt had crystallized into clarity. I lived in a 4-bedroom house in a nice neighborhood, the house Thomas and I had bought when Derek was 5. It was too big for me now. Everyone said so. I should downsize, move to a condo, make things easier. But I'd resisted because this was home. This was where I'd raised my son, where Thomas had died in our bedroom with me holding his hand, where every corner held a memory. Now, standing in my kitchen making tea, I realized Derek had been circling both properties for a while. The comments about the city house being too much for me, the suggestions that the lake house was wasted, the increasing questions about my will, my finances, my plans. He'd been positioning himself, and I'd been too naive, too trusting, too much of a mother to see it. I pulled out my phone and made a call. "Richard, it's Margaret Holloway. I know it's Saturday evening, but I need to talk to you about some legal matters. Soon. Monday morning?" Richard Patterson had been my father's protege, and then partner before Dad retired. He was in his 70s now himself, semi-retired but still sharp as ever. We'd stayed friendly over the years, occasionally having lunch, exchanging Christmas cards. "Margaret," his warm voice came through the phone. "Of course. Is everything all right?" "No," I said simply. "But it will be. I need to discuss property law, trust structures, and how to protect myself from family members who seem to think I'm too old to manage my own affairs." There was a pause, and when Richard spoke again, his voice had shifted from friendly to professional. "I see. 9 a.m. Monday morning, my office. And Margaret, don't sign anything or make any promises until we talk." "I won't," I assured him. "Thank you, Richard." After I hung up, I made another call, this one to my friend Patricia, who'd been my colleague during my teaching years and remained one of my closest confidants. "Maggie!" she answered on the second ring, her voice bright. "How's the lake house? Getting some rest?" "Patricia," I said, and my voice must have conveyed something because she immediately went quiet. "Can you come over? I need to talk to someone, and you're the only person I trust right now." "I'll be there in 20 minutes." She arrived in 15, letting herself in with the spare key I'd given her years ago, finding me still sitting at the kitchen table with my now cold tea. Patricia took one look at my face and said, "What did Derek do?" So I told her. Everything. The cold reception, the words from Vanessa, Derek's grip on my wrist, the demand to sign over the deed, the threat to cut me off from the family. Patricia's face grew darker with each sentence. By the time I finished, she was pacing my kitchen, her hands clenched into fists. "That ungrateful, entitled little—" She bit off the words. "After everything you've done for him, after the money you gave him for his business investment last year, after you've babysat those kids every week for free, after—" She turned to me. "Maggie, you have to do something." "I am," I said calmly. "I'm seeing Richard Patterson Monday morning." "Good." She sat down across from me, reaching for my hands. "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking," I said slowly, "that Derek needs to understand consequences. He's threatened to cut me off from my grandchildren, from the family. He's called me a leech. He's demanded my property. So I'm going to show him what it actually means when I stop being the leech he thinks I am." Patricia's eyes narrowed. "What does that mean?" "It means no more babysitting Emma and Jake 3 days a week. No more emergency cash when Vanessa overspends on her credit cards. No more helping with bills. No more family dinners at my house where I cook and pay for everything. No more being available at their convenience." "That's a start," Patricia said carefully. "But that won't protect your property." "No," I agreed. "Which is why I'm talking to Richard. My father taught me something important. Never let anyone pressure you into making decisions about property. And never, ever let family members think they're entitled to your hard-earned assets just because they share your DNA. We talked late into the evening, Patricia ordering Chinese food that we barely touched, both of us working through the implications of what had happened. She told me about her own family drama, a brother who'd tried to manipulate their elderly mother into changing her will. It had torn their family apart, but Patricia didn't regret standing up for what was right. "The hardest thing," she said, "will be sticking to your boundaries when Derek comes back, because he will come back, Maggie. As soon as he realizes you're not going to cave, he'll try a different approach. Apologies, guilt trips, using the grandkids as leverage." "I know," I said quietly, "but I can't unsee what I saw today. I can't unhear those words. Something broke between us, and I don't think it can be fixed." That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, Thomas's side of the bed still somehow feeling empty after 8 years. I wished he were here. He would have known what to do, what to say. He would have been furious at Derek's behavior, but he also would have found a way to make it right. But Thomas was gone, and I had to handle this alone. Except I wasn't alone, I realized. I had Richard. I had Patricia. I had my own intelligence, my own strength, my own rights. And I had something else. Information Derek didn't know I had. Monday morning came slowly. I spent Sunday in a strange state of calm, cleaning my house, working in my garden, doing normal things while my mind spun through scenarios and strategies. Derek didn't call. Vanessa didn't text. The silence from them was absolute, which told me everything I needed to know. They were confident they'd won, confident that their ultimatum would force me into compliance. Richard's office was in the same building where my father had worked for 40 years. Walking into it felt like coming home. Richard greeted me warmly, ushered me into his private office, and closed the door. "Tell me everything," he said simply. So I did. Once again, I recounted the story, but this time with more detail. The exact words Derek used, the way Vanessa had orchestrated the confrontation, the physical grip on my wrist that had left faint bruises I showed Richard. His expression grew progressively grimmer. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled, thinking. "Margaret," he said finally, "I'm going to ask you a question, and I need you to be completely honest with me. What do you want the outcome to be here?" I'd thought about this all weekend. I want my property protected. I want assurance that Derek can never force me to sign anything. I want consequences for what he did. And I want to make sure that if anything happens to me, he doesn't automatically inherit everything just because he's my son. Richard nodded slowly. "Understandable. Let's talk about your options." For the next 2 hours, we went through everything. My current will, which left everything to Derek. My property holdings, the city house, the lake house, some investments Thomas had left me that had grown substantially over the years. My monthly income from Social Security and Thomas's pension. My savings. "You're not rich," Richard said bluntly, "but you're comfortable. More comfortable than Derek probably realizes. These investments alone are worth—" He named a figure that made my eyebrows rise. I'd known they'd done well, but not that well. "Thomas was smart with money," I said softly. "He was, and you've been smart by not touching them. But here's what concerns me, Margaret. If Derek is already this aggressive about the lake house, and if he doesn't know about these investments, what happens? When he finds out? What happens if you become incapacitated and he has power of attorney?" A chill ran through me. I made Derek my power of attorney years ago, right after Thomas died." Richard's expression darkened. "We're changing that immediately. Today, before you leave this office." "To who?" "Me, if you'll trust me, or we can appoint a professional fiduciary. But Margaret, Derek cannot have that power, not after what he did." We spent the rest of the morning restructuring everything. A new will that left Derek a small inheritance, but divided the bulk of my estate among my grandchildren in a trust they couldn't access until 25, with Patricia and Richard as trustees. A revocable living trust for the properties that ensured Derek couldn't touch them. a new power of attorney appointing Richard and Patricia jointly, medical directives that took all decision-making power away from Derek. "This is nuclear," Richard said as we signed the final documents. "You understand that? When Derek finds out, and he will find out eventually, he's going to be furious." "Good," I said calmly. "He should understand what it feels like to lose something he thought was his." "There's something else we should discuss," Richard added. "The lake house. Derek's been using it, you said?" "Yes, he has a key. I gave it to him years ago." "But no formal rental agreement, no lease, no payment?" "Of course not. He's my son. It's family property." Richard pulled out a legal pad. "Here's the thing, Margaret. In some states, if someone uses a property regularly and the owner knows about it and doesn't object, it can create certain rights. Not ownership rights, but usage rights. And if Derek has been telling people he has permission to use it, has been hosting events there, has been establishing it as a second residence, he could claim some kind of right to it?" I felt sick. "It's unlikely, but I want to eliminate even that possibility. I want you to send Derek a formal letter through this office, revoking his permission to use the lake house, asking for the key back, stating clearly that any further use without your explicit written permission will be considered trespassing." "That will start a war," I said softly. "Margaret," Richard said gently, "the war already started. When he grabbed your wrist and demanded you sign over your property, when his wife called you a leech, when he threatened to cut you off from your grandchildren, that was a declaration of war. You're just finally responding." I nodded slowly. He was right. I'd been so conditioned to avoid conflict, to keep the peace, to be the understanding mother that I'd missed the obvious truth. Derek had already broken our relationship. I was just acknowledging the reality. "Draft the letter," I said. "Send it registered mail so he has to sign for it." "And the city house?" Richard asked. "Does he have a key to that too?" "Yes," I admitted. "He comes and goes sometimes when I'm out. He says it's to check on me, make sure everything's okay." "Change the locks," Richard said immediately. "Today, and consider a security system, one with cameras." "You think he'd—" I stopped. After what had happened at the lake house, I couldn't rule anything out. "Okay, I'll call a locksmith this afternoon." I left Richard's office feeling strange, lighter in some ways, heavier in others. I'd protected myself legally, but I'd also drawn a line in the sand with my only child. Part of me hoped Derek would apologize, would realize what he'd done wrong, would make things right. But a larger, wiser part of me knew that wasn't going to happen. I called a locksmith from my car, and he agreed to come out that afternoon. Then I called Patricia and told her everything. "Thank God," she breathed. "Maggie, I was so worried you'd back down, that he'd manipulate you into giving up everything." "I'm done being manipulated," I said, and I meant it. The locksmith was professional and quick, changing all the locks on my doors and installing new deadbolts. He also recommended a security system, and I had him install that too. Cameras at the front door, back door, and garage. The whole thing cost me nearly $2,000, but it was worth it for the peace of mind. That evening, as I was making dinner, my phone rang. Derek. I stared at it for a long moment, watching his name flash on the screen, feeling my heart rate increase. Then I declined the call. He called again immediately. I declined again. A text came through. "Mom, we need to talk. Call me back." I set my phone face down on the counter and went back to making dinner. 3 more calls over the next hour, each one declined. Then a text from Vanessa. "Margaret, Derek's been trying to reach you. Is everything okay?" The fake concern in her message made my jaw tight. I didn't respond. Finally, around 8 p.m., a longer text from Derek. "Mom, I know you're upset about the weekend. Maybe we were too harsh. Can we talk about this? I don't want there to be bad feelings between us. Call me when you can." Still no apology. Still no acknowledgement of what he'd actually done wrong. Just, maybe we were too harsh, and I don't want bad feelings. As if I were the one being unreasonable. I texted back, keeping it brief. "I need some time. I'll contact you when I'm ready." His response was immediate. "Time for what? Mom, don't be dramatic. We just need to discuss the property situation like adults. Don't be dramatic. I turned off my phone. Tuesday, the letter from Richard's office went out via registered mail. Wednesday, I got a notification that it had been delivered and signed for. Thursday, my phone, which I'd turned back on, exploded. 7 calls from Derek in the span of an hour. Texts that started confused, turned angry, then became threatening. What the hell is this letter? You're revoking my access to the lake house? Are you serious? This is ridiculous. We're family. You can't just cut me off from the property. Call me back right now. We need to discuss this. Mom, this is insane. What has gotten into you? If you don't call me back today, I'm coming over there. I didn't respond to any of them. Friday afternoon, my new security camera alerted me to motion at my front door. I checked the app on my phone and saw Derek standing on my porch, repeatedly ringing the doorbell. I was home. My car was in the driveway. He knew I was there, but I didn't answer the door. He rang the bell 15 times. Then he started knocking, calling out, Mom, I know you're in there. Open the door. We need to talk. I sat in my living room, watching him on my phone screen, my heart pounding, but my resolve firm. After 10 minutes, he gave up, but not before shouting loud enough for the camera to pick up clearly. Fine, be stubborn, but you're making a huge mistake. You're going to regret this. The threat was clear, and now I had it recorded. Saturday morning, I received an email from an address I didn't recognize. When I opened it, I realized it was from Vanessa. The email was long, beginning with false sweetness about how worried they were about me, suggesting that my erratic behavior might be a sign that I shouldn't be living alone anymore. It talked about family responsibility and how Derek was just trying to help me manage my properties since I was getting older. Then it got to the real point. They'd consulted with an attorney, interesting since the letter from Richard had gone out less than a week ago, and their attorney suggested that if I was showing signs of diminished capacity, Derek might need to pursue guardianship for my own protection. I read that line 3 times, fury building with each pass. They were threatening to have me declared incompetent, to take away not just my property, but my autonomy, my rights, my freedom. I forwarded the email to Richard immediately with a short message. Is this legal? Can they actually do this? He called me within an hour. Margaret, don't panic. This is a bullying tactic, nothing more. Getting someone declared incompetent requires medical evidence, court proceedings, and a very high burden of proof. One legal letter from my office doesn't constitute erratic behavior, but... He paused. I want you to schedule a complete medical and cognitive evaluation, soon, with documentation from qualified professionals stating that you're of sound mind and perfectly capable of managing your affairs. You think it could actually go that far? My voice shook slightly. I think your son is desperate and dangerous, Richard said bluntly. I think he expected you to crumble, and now that you haven't, he's escalating. So we're going to eliminate even the possibility of this tactic working. When can you see your doctor? I made an appointment for the following week with my primary care physician, and she referred me to a neuropsychologist for cognitive testing. The whole process took 2 weeks, but the results were definitive. I was cognitively intact, mentally sharp, and perfectly capable of making my own decisions. The neuropsychologist's report used phrases like above average for age group and no signs of cognitive decline. I had Richard add all of it to my legal file. Meanwhile, Derek's attempts to contact me continued, but they'd changed in tone. Now they were alternating between aggressive anger and manipulative guilt-tripping. One voicemail. Mom, Emma's been crying. She wants to know why Grandma won't talk to her. How do I explain to a 7-year-old that her grandmother has cut off her own family? Is this really what you want? Another. I talked to Uncle Bill. He thinks you're being ridiculous too. Everyone in the family is worried about you. This isn't normal behavior, Mom. Uncle Bill was Thomas's brother, and I hadn't spoken to him in 3 years. The idea that Derek was mobilizing extended family members against me was both predictable and disgusting. Patricia came over for dinner one evening, and I showed her all the messages, the emails, the voicemails. He's losing control, she observed. He thought he could bully you into compliance, and now that's not working. He's trying every manipulation tactic in the book. Using the kids, using other family members, questioning your sanity. These are classic abuse tactics, Maggie. I keep waiting to feel guilty, I admitted. I keep waiting for the part where I start doubting myself, wondering if I'm being too harsh, if maybe I should just give him what he wants to restore peace. And? Patricia looked at me intently. And that feeling never comes. Every time I start to waver, I remember his hand on my wrist. I remember Vanessa calling me an old leech. I remember them standing in my house, demanding I sign over my property or get out. And I realize I don't actually owe them anything. I already gave Derek everything a mother should give a child: life, love, education, support, foundation. The fact that he wants more, that he feels entitled to my property while I'm still alive, that he's willing to threaten and manipulate to get it, that's not my failure. That's his. Patricia reached across the table and squeezed my hand. You're stronger than he ever gave you credit for. A month after that weekend at the lake house, I drove back there, alone this time, with my new keys and my new legal protections firmly in place. The house was empty. Derek had removed everything he'd left there over the years, his family photos that had been on the walls, the kids' toys that had cluttered the porch, Vanessa's expensive cookware from the kitchen. It was like they'd erased themselves from the space, punishing me by removing their presence. But as I walked through the rooms, I realized I didn't feel punished. I felt relieved. This place could be mine again. Truly mine. Not a space I shared with ungrateful family members who saw it as their future inheritance, but a sanctuary where I could actually rest. I spent the weekend there, sitting on the dock with my morning coffee, reading books in front of the fireplace, cooking simple meals just for myself. It was peaceful in a way it hadn't been in years. On Sunday afternoon, as I was packing to leave, my phone rang. An unfamiliar number with a local area code. I answered cautiously. Hello? Mrs. Holloway? This is Janet Kim. I'm the president of the local homeowners association up here at the lake. Oh, I said, surprised. Hello, Janet, is there a problem? Well, actually, I'm calling about your son. Derek, is that right? My stomach tightened. Yes, what about him? He attended our last HOA meeting, the one 2 weeks ago. He introduced himself as the new owner of your property and made several proposals for changing the community rules. Mrs. Holloway, I need to ask directly, have you sold or transferred your property to your son? The world seemed to tilt slightly. No, absolutely not. The property is still entirely in my name. I see. Janet's voice was carefully neutral. That's what I suspected. He was very convincing, had paperwork with him that he said showed the transfer. But when I asked to see the actual deed, he said it was still being processed. It didn't feel right, so I thought I should reach out to you directly. We have your contact information on file as the property owner. Thank you for calling, I managed. Janet, my son does not own this property, is not in the process of buying it, and has actually been formally notified that he no longer has permission to use it. If he shows up again claiming to be the owner, please contact me immediately. There was a pause. Mrs. Holloway, I hope you don't mind me saying this, but we've seen this before. Family disputes over property. It can get ugly. If you need any documentation from the HOA confirming ownership, I'm happy to provide it. That might be helpful, I said. Thank you. I appreciate you looking out for the community and for me. After we hung up, I immediately called Richard and told him what had happened. He's escalating, Richard said grimly. Margaret, he's now committing fraud, representing himself as the owner when he's not. That's actionable. We could pursue charges. I don't want him arrested, I said quickly. He's still my son, still the father of my grandchildren. Then what do you want? Richard asked. Because this isn't going to stop on its own. He's going to keep pushing, keep manipulating, keep trying to find a way to get what he wants. I thought about that. What did I want? I want him to understand, I said slowly, that there are consequences for his actions, real consequences. I want him to realize that he's not entitled to my property just because he's my son. And I paused, feeling something shift inside me. I want to use this situation to protect other people. What do you mean? How many other elderly parents are in my situation? Being pressured by adult children to hand over property? Being called leeches for wanting to maintain control of their own assets? Maybe there's a way to turn this into something bigger than just my personal situation. Richard was quiet for a moment. You want to make a statement. I want to shine a light on this, I said. On elder financial abuse, on exploitation, on the entitlement that makes children think their parents' property is already theirs before the parents are even gone. That's ambitious, Richard said, and it would require you to be public about what's happened. Are you ready for that? Was I? I thought about all the shame I'd felt initially, all the embarrassment at my son's behavior, but underneath that was anger, righteous anger at the injustice of what was happening not just to me, but to countless other elderly people. Yes, I said. I'm ready. Over the next month, with Richard's help and Patricia's support, I put together a plan. I contacted a local news station that had a consumer protection segment about elder abuse. I reached out to organizations that helped seniors with legal issues. I documented everything: the messages, the emails, the security camera footage of Derek at my door, the report from the HOA president about Derek's fraud. And then I did something Derek would never have expected. I invited him to lunch, at a restaurant, public, neutral territory. The text I sent was simple. Derek, we need to talk. Lunch at Morrison's Bistro, Tuesday at noon. Just you, not Vanessa. This is your one opportunity to hear what I have to say. He responded within minutes. Finally, I'll be there. Tuesday morning, I dressed carefully. Not like a feeble old woman, but like the strong, capable person I was. A nice blouse, slacks, my mother's pearl necklace that Thomas had given me on our wedding day. I wanted Derek to look at me and see someone who couldn't be pushed around. I arrived at the restaurant early, chose a table in the middle of the dining room where we'd be visible, but could still have a private conversation. Richard was seated at another table across the room, there for backup if I needed it, though Derek wouldn't recognize him. Derek arrived exactly at noon. He looked tired, I noticed, stressed, but also angry, jaw tight, eyes hard. He sat down across from me without greeting, without hugging, without any of the warmth that should exist between a mother and son. I'm glad you finally came to your senses, he started. Mom, this has gone on long enough. Whatever point you were trying to make, you've made it. Now I'm not here to negotiate, I interrupted quietly. I'm here to explain to you what happens next. His eyes narrowed. What are you talking about? Derek, do you remember what you said to me at the lake house? I kept my voice calm, measured. You called me a leech. You grabbed my wrist. You told me to sign over my property or get out. You threatened to cut me off from my grandchildren if I didn't comply. I was frustrated, he said defensively. You were being unreasonable about the house. It's just sitting there while you what? While you feel entitled to it? Derek, I own that property. I bought it with your father 40 years ago. We saved for it. We maintained it. We built memories there. It's mine, not yours. Mine. But you're not using it. His voice rose slightly, and several other diners glanced over. He lowered it, leaning forward. Mom, you go there maybe once a month. That's wasting. What I do with my property is none of your business, I said, each word precise. I could leave it empty every day of the year, and it would still be none of your business. You are not entitled to my assets while I'm alive. You're not entitled to them at all, actually. What I do with my property, my money, my belongings, that's my choice to make. I'm your son, he said, and there was something desperate in his voice now. I'm your only child. Everything you have should come to me eventually. Why are you making this so difficult? Should it? I tilted my head, studying him. Why? Because you share my DNA? Because I gave birth to you? Derek, being my son means you are entitled to my love, my care, my support while you were growing up. I gave you all of that. I gave you 18 years of childhood, paid for your education, helped you start your adult life. But now you're 45 years old. You're not entitled to anything else from me, especially not my property while I'm still alive and living in it. That's cold, Mom. Really cold. Is it? I leaned back, folding my hands. Was it warm when you grabbed my wrist? When your wife called me an old leech? When you sent me an email threatening to have me declared incompetent? His face flushed. That was just, we were exploring options, for your own good. For my own good, I repeated softly. Derek, everything you've done has been for your own benefit, not mine. You want my house, you want my property. You've probably looked into my finances and realized there's more there than you expected. You see me as an obstacle between you and money you feel you deserve. That's not... He stopped, and I could see him calculating, trying to figure out how to spin this. Mom, I'm worried about you. You're 72. What if something happens? What if you can't manage things anymore? I'm just trying to help. Help, I said. Is that what you call fraud? Telling the HOA you own my lake house when you don't? His face went white. How did you... The HOA president called me. She wanted to verify that you were actually the new owner before she allowed you to vote on community changes. Imagine her surprise when I told her you weren't. Derek's hands clenched into fists on the table. You're trying to destroy me. No, I said calmly. I'm trying to protect myself from you. There's a difference. Derek, you have a choice right now. You can accept that your behavior was wrong, that you've crossed lines that shouldn't be crossed, and we can try to rebuild some kind of relationship based on mutual respect. Or you can continue down this path, and you'll discover exactly how far I'm willing to go to protect myself and other elderly people from exploitation. Other elderly people? What are you talking about? I pulled out my phone, opened up a document, and slid it across the table to him. That's the interview I've scheduled with Channel 7 News for next week. Their consumer protection segment. They're very interested in doing a story on elder financial abuse, specifically adult children who pressure their aging parents to sign over property and assets. His face drained of color as he read. You wouldn't. I absolutely would. And I have documentation for everything. The messages, the emails, the voicemails using Emma as manipulation, the security footage, the HOA incident, everything. You'll embarrass yourself, he said, but his voice shook. You'll make yourself look like a vindictive old woman who's turned against her own son. Or, I said quietly, I'll look like a brave woman standing up against manipulation and abuse. A woman who's willing to speak out to protect others in similar situations. Which way it goes depends entirely on what you do next. Derek stared at me, and I could see him warring with himself. Pride versus pragmatism, anger versus fear. What do you want? He finally asked. An apology, I said. A real one. Not, I'm sorry you were upset, or maybe I was too harsh. A genuine acknowledgement of what you did wrong and why it was wrong. And if I apologize, you'll cancel the interview? No, I said, and watched his face fall. The interview is happening. But if you apologize genuinely, if you can show me that you actually understand what you did wrong and why, then I won't use your name. I won't show your face. You'll be anonymous in the story. But Derek, understand this. Our relationship is changed forever. You will never have keys to my properties again. You will never be in my will as the primary beneficiary. You will never have power of attorney or any legal control over my life. Those bridges are burned. So even if I apologize, you're still punishing me. I'm not punishing you, I said. I'm establishing boundaries. There's a difference. What you see as punishment is actually just me protecting myself from future harm. If that feels like punishment to you, maybe you should examine why you think you're entitled to access to my property and my life. We sat in silence for a long moment. The restaurant bustled around us, servers bringing food, diners chatting and laughing, normal life continuing while our family relationship crumbled. I'm sorry, Derek finally said, but it was flat, emotionless. "Try again," I said, "and this time tell me specifically what you're sorry for." His jaw worked. "I'm sorry for grabbing your wrist. For the things Vanessa said, for—" He stopped, took a breath. "For thinking I had a right to make demands about your property." "Why was it wrong?" I pushed. "Because it's your property," he said, and there was finally something real in his voice. Resentment, maybe, but also genuine realization. "Because you earned it, you own it, and I don't have any right to it while you're alive. Or after I'm gone," I added. "An inheritance is a gift, Derek, not an entitlement. I could leave everything to charity if I wanted. The fact that you'll get anything at all should be received with gratitude, not demanded as your due." He nodded slowly. His whole body slumped in defeat. I felt no triumph in that moment, just profound sadness. This was my son, my only child, the baby I'd held, the toddler I'd chased, the teenager I'd guided, the man I'd tried to raise right. And somehow I'd ended up here, in a restaurant, establishing boundaries against him like he was a stranger who'd wronged me, which, I supposed, he was. "I'll need that apology in writing," I said. "An email will be fine. And Derek, if you violate my boundaries again, if you show up at my house, if you try to access my properties, if you continue to manipulate or threaten, I will pursue legal action. Richard Patterson has all the documentation ready. Do you understand?" "Richard Patterson?" Derek's head snapped up. "You went to Dad's old friend?" "I went to an excellent attorney who specializes in property and estate law," I corrected. "The fact that he knew your father and watched you grow up just makes this more heartbreaking for him. But he's very clear on what needs to happen to protect me." Derek stood up abruptly, his chair scraping loud against the floor. "I need to go." "The written apology," I reminded him. "By tomorrow." He left without another word, walking stiff and angry through the restaurant. Several diners watched him go, then looked at me with curiosity or sympathy. Richard came over to my table once Derek was gone. "You did well," he said quietly. "That was incredibly difficult, and you handled it with grace." "I don't feel graceful," I admitted. "I feel like I just amputated part of my life." "Sometimes," Richard said gently. "That's the only way to save the rest of it." The email arrived the next morning early. Derek's written apology was longer than I'd expected, more detailed. He outlined what he'd done wrong, acknowledged that he'd been influenced by financial pressure and Vanessa's attitudes about family wealth, admitted that he'd started seeing me as an obstacle rather than his mother. It wasn't perfect. There were still hints of justification, still notes of resentment, but it was genuine enough. I forwarded it to Richard, who confirmed it was sufficient. The interview with Channel 7 News happened the following week. The reporter, a sharp woman named Maria Santos, was compassionate but thorough. She asked about the progression of events, the tactics Derek had used, the emotional impact. I kept Derek's name and identifying details out of it, as promised, but I was honest about everything else. "Why are you speaking out?" Maria asked. "Because I know I'm not the only one," I said. "There are thousands of elderly people facing pressure from their own children, being called burdens or leeches, being manipulated into handing over property and control. It's a form of elder abuse that doesn't get talked about enough because people are embarrassed, because we think we failed as parents if our children treat us this way. But the truth is, this is about the children's choices, not our failures. And people need to know they have the right to protect themselves, even from family." The segment aired during prime time. Within hours, my phone was ringing. Not Derek, but other people. Friends I hadn't spoken to in years, elderly neighbors who'd seen it, even a few strangers who'd gotten my number somehow and wanted to share their own stories. Patricia came over that evening, and we watched the segment together again on the news website. "You're brave, Maggie," she said. "Really brave." "I'm terrified," I admitted. "Derek's going to see this. Even without his name, he'll know. He'll probably be furious." "Let him be furious," Patricia said. "You told the truth. You protected yourself, and you've helped other people. That's what matters." 2 days later, I received another email from Derek. This one was short. Mom, I saw the interview. I understand now why you did it, even though it's humiliating knowing people might figure out it's about me. I don't know if we'll ever have a normal relationship again, but I want you to know I'm trying to understand where you're coming from. Vanessa and I are going to counseling to work on some things. I'm not asking for forgiveness or reconciliation right now. I just wanted you to know that I heard you. Derek. I read it 3 times, looking for the manipulation, the angle, the hidden demand, but it seemed genuine. Resigned, sad, but genuine. I didn't respond immediately. I needed to think about what, if anything, I wanted to say back. A week later, I received a letter in the mail. Not from Derek, but from the HOA president, Janet Kim. She thanked me for my honesty about the situation, informed me that Derek had been removed from the HOA mailing list and would not be allowed to attend meetings or make proposals about the property, and included a copy of a formal statement from the HOA board confirming my sole ownership of the lake house. That weekend, I drove back to the lake house again. This time, I invited Patricia to come with me. We spent 3 days there, 2 elderly women enjoying the peace of the lake, cooking meals together, drinking wine on the dock at sunset, talking about life and loss and survival. "Do you think you'll ever let Derek back into your life?" Patricia asked on our last evening there. I watched the sun sink lower, painting the water gold and orange. "I don't know," I admitted. "Part of me wants to. He's my son. I love him, even after everything. But I can't trust him anymore. And without trust, what kind of relationship can we have?" "Maybe a different kind," Patricia suggested. "Not the close mother-son relationship you had before, but something more boundaried, distant, but civil." "Maybe," I said. "Or maybe the relationship we had before was already broken, and I was just too naive to see it. Maybe he's been seeing me as a source of money and property for years, and I mistook that for love." "That's a terrible thought." "It is," I agreed. "But it might be true. And if it is, then what I've lost isn't really what I thought I had anyway." We sat in silence as the sun disappeared completely, leaving us in the gentle darkness of a summer evening by the lake. 3 months after that confrontation at the restaurant, I received an unexpected visitor at my city house. My security camera alerted me to someone at the door, and when I checked, I saw Emma, my 7-year-old granddaughter, standing on the porch with Vanessa. I hadn't seen Emma since that day at the lake house. Derek had made good on his threat to keep the grandchildren away from me, using them as leverage like I'd known he would. I opened the door slowly, keeping the security chain on. "Grandma!" Emma's face lit up, and despite everything, my heart clenched. I loved this child. I'd babysat her since she was an infant, had taught her to read, had been there for every birthday and milestone. "Hello, Emma," I said carefully, then looked at Vanessa. "What do you want?" Vanessa looked different, less polished, more uncertain. "Margaret, can we talk? Just for a few minutes?" I considered saying no, closing the door, maintaining my boundaries, but Emma was looking at me with such hope, such innocent love, that I couldn't do it. I unlatched the chain and let them in. Emma immediately hugged me, and I hugged her back, feeling tears prick my eyes. This child hadn't done anything wrong. She was innocent in all of this. Vanessa stood awkwardly in my entryway, not moving further into the house without permission. "Emma, honey," she said, "why don't you go play in the living room for a minute while Grandma and I talk?" Emma skipped off, heading toward the toy basket I still kept for when the grandkids used to visit. Vanessa turned to me, and I saw something in her face I'd never seen before. Shame. "I owe you an apology," she said quietly. "A real one. What I said at the lake house, calling you a—" She couldn't even repeat the words. "It was horrible. It was cruel. And it wasn't true." I stood very still, waiting. "Derek and I have been going to therapy," she continued. "Both couples therapy and individually. My therapist has been helping me understand some things about how I was raised, about my attitudes toward money and family and—" She stopped, took a breath. "I grew up poor, Margaret, really poor, and I've spent my adult life terrified of going back to that. When Derek told me about your properties, about your investments, I saw it as security for my children, for our future. I convinced myself that you were being selfish by holding on to assets you didn't need while we were struggling. Are you struggling? I asked quietly. Derek has a good job. You live in a nice house. The children go to private school. We're overextended, Vanessa admitted. Credit cards, loans, trying to keep up a lifestyle we can't actually afford. And instead of cutting back, instead of living within our means, I convinced Derek that the solution was getting access to your assets. I convinced him that you were the problem, that you were being unreasonable. I made him into someone he wasn't, someone who would grab his own mother's wrist and demand property that wasn't his. Tears were running down her face now. I destroyed his relationship with you. I made him into someone who could hurt you, and I'm so sorry. I'd waited months for an apology from Derek. I'd gotten a written one, a forced one, a resigned one. But this raw, genuine remorse from Vanessa, I hadn't expected. Why are you here? I asked. Because Emma has been crying for you. Because Jake keeps asking when we can see Grandma. Because Derek is miserable and full of guilt and doesn't know how to fix what he broke. And because, she looked at me directly, because it was my fault more than his. And I needed you to know that. I needed to take responsibility for my part in this. We stood there, me in my own home, Vanessa in her designer clothes that she apparently couldn't afford, both of us damaged by what had happened. I can't give you what you want, I said finally. My properties are staying mine, my will is changed, the legal protections are in place, and they're not being removed. I'm not changing my boundaries. I'm not asking you to, Vanessa said quickly. I'm not here for that. I'm here to apologize and to ask if there's any way you might be willing to have a relationship with your grandchildren. They miss you, and they deserve to know their grandmother. I thought about that. Emma laughing in my living room. Jake, who was 5 now, who I hadn't seen in months. My grandchildren, innocent victims of their parents' greed and my necessary boundaries. I need to think about it, I said. I'm not saying no, but I'm not saying yes either. If I do agree to see them, it will be on my terms, at my house, at times I specify. I won't be the on-call babysitter anymore. I won't be taken advantage of. Is that clear? Vanessa nodded. Whatever terms you set, we'll follow them. I promise. I wasn't sure I believed her promises anymore, but I also wasn't ready to completely close the door on my grandchildren. Give me a week to think about it, I said. I'll email you. Vanessa called Emma back, and they left, Emma hugging me one more time before they went. After they were gone, I sat in my living room, feeling exhausted and conflicted and surprisingly hopeful. Patricia, when I called her and told her about it, was skeptical. Be careful, Maggie. This could be another manipulation. It could be, I agreed. But it might also be genuine. And if there's even a chance I can have a relationship with my grandchildren without compromising my boundaries, I want to try. Just protect yourself, Patricia said. You've come so far. Don't let them pull you back into dysfunction. I thought about that for days, weighing the risks against the potential rewards. In the end, I drafted an email to Vanessa outlining strict boundaries. I would see Emma and Jake twice a month, at my house, for 2 hours each time. Derek and Vanessa would drop them off and pick them up, but would not come inside. There would be no discussions of property, money, or inheritance. If the boundaries were violated even once, the visits would stop immediately. Vanessa's response was immediate and agreeable. The first visit was awkward. Emma was excited. Jake was shy, having been away from me for so long. But within an hour, we'd fallen into an easy rhythm, reading books, playing games, making cookies. Just grandmother and grandchildren, the way it should be. When Derek came to pick them up, he stayed on the porch, didn't try to come in. We exchanged polite nods, nothing more. But I saw something in his face. Regret, maybe. Grief for what we'd lost. Over the following months, a new normal established itself. Regular visits with the grandchildren. Polite but distant interactions with Derek and Vanessa. No discussions of property or money. No attempts to manipulate or control. It wasn't the family relationship I'd once had. It wasn't the close bond I'd imagined having with my son and his family. But it was something. It was sustainable. It was boundaried and safe. And for me, that was enough. A year after that terrible day at the lake house, I sat on the dock watching the sunset, alone and at peace. The water was calm, the sky painted in shades of purple and gold, the air warm with late summer. I thought about everything that had happened: the betrayal, the legal battles, the interview, the slow, careful rebuilding of limited relationships. I'd lost something important: the illusion that my son loved me unconditionally, that family meant loyalty and care. But I'd gained something too: self-respect, boundaries, the knowledge that I could stand up for myself even against people I loved. My phone buzzed with a text from Patricia. "How's the lake house? Finding peace?" I typed back, "Yes, finally, real peace." And it was true. For the first time in years, maybe decades, I felt genuinely at peace. Not because everything was perfect, not because my family had magically become loving and supportive, but because I'd learned the most important lesson of all: that I deserved to protect myself, that my boundaries mattered, that being someone's mother didn't mean being their doormat or their bank account. I'd wanted to relax at my lake house that day a year ago. My son had been inside with his family and told me there was no space for me, had called me a leech, had demanded I sign over my property or get out. I'd smiled then and said it was okay. And what I'd done, protecting myself, speaking out, establishing consequences, hadn't destroyed them. It had just shown them that their mother was stronger than they'd ever realized. That the quiet, giving woman they'd taken advantage of had a backbone of steel. Their life wasn't a nightmare. But their access to my resources and my unconditional tolerance certainly was gone. And that, I realized, was exactly as it should be. I was 73 now, healthy and independent, with years ahead of me. Years to enjoy my properties, to spend time with friends who valued me, to see my grandchildren grow up with healthy boundaries modeled for them. Years to be myself, fully and completely, without apologizing for protecting what was mine. As the sun disappeared below the horizon, I raised my glass of wine to the sky, a toast to Thomas, who'd helped me build this life, to myself, for having the courage to defend it, and to the future, whatever it might bring. The nightmare wasn't mine to live. It was the consequence others had, earned through their own choices, and I was finally beautifully free.